The Bell A-1 Iroquois, nicknamed Huey, is a utility military helicopter powered by a single turboshaft engine, with two-blade main and tail rotors. The first member of the prolific Huey family, it was developed by Bell Helicopter to meet a United States Army's 1952 requirement for a medical evacuation and utility helicopter, and first flew in 1956. The A-1 was the first turbine-powered helicopter to enter production in 1960 for the United States military, and more than 16,000 have been built since. The Iroquois was originally designated Hu-1, hence the Huey nickname, which has remained in common use, despite the official redesignation to A-1 in 1962. The A-1 first saw service in combat operations during the Vietnam War, with around 7,000 helicopters deployed. The Bell 204 and 205 are Iroquois versions developed for the civil market. Development. In 1952, the U.S. Army identified a requirement for a new helicopter to serve as medical evacuation, medevac, instrument trainer, and general utility aircraft. The Army determined that current helicopters were too large, underpowered, or too complex to maintain easily. In November 1953, revised military requirements were submitted to the Department of the Army. 20 companies submitted designs in their bid for the contract, including Bell Helicopter with the Model 204 and Come-On aircraft with a turbine-powered version of the H-43. On February 23, 1955, the Army announced its decision, selecting Bell to build 3 copies of the Model 204 for evaluation with the designation XH-40. Model 204. Powered by a prototype Lycoming YT53L1, LTC-1B1, engine producing 700 shop, 520 kilowatts, the XH-40 first flew on October 20, 1956 at Fort Worth, Texas, with Bell's chief test pilot, Floyd Carlson, at the controls. 2 more prototypes were built in 1957, and the Army had previously ordered 6 YA-40 service test aircraft, even before the first prototype had flown. In March 1960, the Army awarded Bell a production contract for 100 aircraft, which was designated as the Hu-1A and officially named Iroquois after the Native American nations. The helicopter quickly developed a nickname derived from its designation of Hu-1, which came to be pronounced as Huey. The reference became so popular that Bell began casting the name on the helicopter's anti-torque pedals. The official U.S. Army name was almost never used in practice. After September 1962, the designation for all models was changed to A-1 under a Unified Department of Defense (DoD) designation system, but the nickname remained. While glowing in praise for the helicopter's advances over piston-engined helicopters, the Army reports from the service tests of the YA-40 found it to be underpowered, with the production T-53L1A power plant producing a maximum continuous 770 shaft horsepower, 570 kilowatts. The Army indicated the need for improved follow-on models even as the first A-1As were being delivered. In response, Bell proposed the A-1B, equipped with the Lycoming T-53L5 engine producing 960 shop, 720 kilowatts, and a longer cabin that could accommodate either 7 passengers or 4 stretchers and a medical attendant. Army testing of the A-1B started in November 1960, with the first production aircraft delivered in March 1961. Bell commenced development of the A-1C in 1960 in order to correct aerodynamic deficiencies of the armed A-1B. Bell fitted the A-1C with a 1,100 shop, 820 kilowatts, T-53L11 engine to provide the power needed to lift all weapons systems in use or under development. The Army would eventually refit all A-1B aircraft with the same engine. A new rotor system was developed for the A-1C to allow higher air speeds and reduce the incidence of retreating blade stall during diving engagements. The improved rotor resulted in better maneuverability and a slight speed increase. The increased power and a larger diameter rotor required Bell's engineers to design a new tail boom for the A-1C. The longer tail boom incorporated a wider chord vertical fin on the tail rotor pylon and larger synchronized elevators. Bell also introduced a dual hydraulic control system for redundancy as well as an improved inlet filter system for the dusty conditions found in Southeast Asia. The A1C fuel capacity was increased to 242 US gallons, 920 liters, and gross weight was raised to 9,500 pounds, 4,309 kilograms, giving a nominal useful load of 4,673 pounds, 2,120 kilograms. A1C production started in June 1966 with a total of 766 aircraft produced, including 5 for the Royal Australian Navy and 5 for Norway. Model 205. While earlier short-body Hueys were a success, the Army wanted a version that could carry more troops. Bell's solution was to stretch the Hu-1B fuselage by 41 in, 104 centimeters, and use the extra space to fit 4 seats next to the transmission, facing out. Seating capacity increased to 15, including crew. The enlarged cabin could also accommodate 6 stretchers and a medic, 2 more than the earlier models. In place of the earlier model's sliding side doors with a single window, larger doors were fitted which had 2 windows, plus a small hinged panel with an optional window, providing enhanced access to the cabin. The doors and hinged panels were quickly removable, allowing the Huey to be flown in a doors-off configuration. The Model 205 prototype flew on August 16, 1961. 7 pre-production/prototype aircraft had been delivered for testing at Edwards AFB starting in March 1961. The 205 was initially equipped with a 44-foot, 13.4 m, main rotor and a Lycoming T53L9 engine with 1,100 shop, 820 kilowatts. The rotor was lengthened to 48 feet, 14.6 m, with a chord of 21 in, 53 centimeters. The tail boom was also lengthened, in order to accommodate the longer rotor blades. Altogether, the modifications resulted in a gross weight capacity of 9,500 pounds, 4,309 kilograms. The Army ordered production of the 205 in 1963, produced with a T53L11 engine for its multi-fuel capability. The prototypes were designated as A1D and the production aircraft was designated as the A1D. In 1966, Bell installed the 1,400 shop, 1,000 kilowatts, Lycoming T53L13 engine to provide more power for the aircraft. The pitot tube was relocated from the nose to the roof of the cockpit, to prevent damage during landing. Production models in this configuration were designated as the A1H. Marine Corps. In 1962, the United States Marine Corps held a competition to choose an assault support helicopter to replace the Cessna 01 fixed-wing aircraft and the Come-On 043D helicopter. The winner was the A1B, which was already in service with the Army. The helicopter was designated the A1E and modified to meet marine requirements. The major changes included the use of all aluminum construction for corrosion resistance, radios compatible with Marine Corps ground frequencies, a rotor brake for shipboard used to stop the rotor quickly on shutdown and a roof-mounted rescue hoist. The A1E was first flown on October 7, 1963, and deliveries commenced February 21, 1964, with 192 aircraft completed. Due to production line realities at Bell, the A1E was produced in 2 different versions, both with the same A1E designation. The first 34 built were essentially A1B airframes with the Lycoming T53L11 engine producing 1,100 shop, 820 kilowatts. When Bell switched production to the A1C, the A1E production benefited from the same changes. The Marine Corps later upgraded A1E engines to the Lycoming T53L13, which produced 1,400 shop, 1,000 kilowatts, after the Army introduced the A1M and upgraded their A1C helicopters to the same engine. Air Force. The United States Air Forces, U.S. Air Force, competition for a helicopter to be used for support on missile bases included a specific requirement to mandate the use of the General Electric T-58 turboshaft as a power plant. The Air Force had a large inventory of these engines on hand for its fleet of HH-3 Jolly Green Giant rescue helicopters, and using the same engine for both helicopters would save costs. In response, Bell proposed an upgraded version of the 204B with the T-58 engine. Because the T-58 output shaft is at the rear, and was thus mounted in front of the transmission on the HH-3, it had to have a separate offset gearbox, SDG or speed decreaser gearbox, at the rear, and shafting to couple to the A1 transmission. Twin engine variants. The single engine A1 variants were followed by the twin engine A1N twin Huey, and years later the A1Y Venom. Bell began development of the A1N for Canada in 1968. It changed to the more powerful Pratt & Whitney Canada PT6T twin engine set. The U.S. also ordered the helicopter, with the U.S. Air Force receiving it in 1970. Canada's military, the U.S. Marine Corps, and the U.S. Navy first received the model in 1971. In 1996, the USMC began the H-1 upgrade program by awarding a contract to Bell Helicopter for developing the improved A1Y and A1ZS variants. The A1Y includes a lengthened cabin, 4-blade rotor, and two more powerful GET 700 engines. The A1Y entered service with the USMC in 2008. Design. The A1 has a metal fuselage of semi-monocoque construction with tubular landing skids and two rotor blades on the main rotor. Early A1 models featured a single Lycoming T53 turboshaft engine in versions with power ratings from 700 shop, 522 kilowatts, to 1400 shop, 1040 kilowatts. Later A1 and related models would feature twin engines and 4-blade rotors. All aircraft in the A1 family have similar construction. The A1H is the most produced version, and is representative of all types. The main structure consists of two longitudinal main beams that run under the passenger cabin to the nose and back to the tail boom attachment point. The main beams are separated by transverse bulkheads and provide the supporting structure for the cabin, landing gear, underfloor fuel tanks, transmission, engine, and tail boom. The main beams are joined at the lift beam, a short aluminum girder structure that is attached to the transmission via a lift link on the top and the cargo hook on the bottom, and is located at the aircraft's center of gravity. The lift beams were changed to steel later in the A1H's life, due to cracking on high-time airframes. The semi-monocoque tail boom attaches to the fuselage with 4 bolts. The A1H's dynamic components include the engine, transmission, rotor mast, main rotor blades, tail rotor drive shaft, and the 42-degree and 90-degree gearboxes. The transmission is of a planetary type and reduces the engine's output to 324 rpm at the main rotor. The two-blade, semi-rigid rotor design, with pre-coned and underslung blades, is a development of early Bell model designs, such as the Bell 47, with which it shares common design features, including a dampened stabilizer bar. The two-blade system reduces storage space required for the aircraft, but at a cost of higher vibration levels. The two-blade design is also responsible for the characteristic Huey thump when the aircraft is in flight, which is particularly evident during descent and in turning flight. The tail rotor is driven from the main transmission, via the two directional gearboxes, which provide a tail rotor speed approximately 6 times that of the main rotor to increase tail rotor effectiveness. The A1H also features a synchronized elevator on the tail boom, which is linked to the cyclic control and allows a wider center of gravity range. The standard fuel system consists of 5 interconnected fuel tanks, 3 of which are mounted behind the transmission and 2 of which are under the cabin floor. The landing gear consists of 2 arched cross tubes joining the skid tubes. The skids have replaceable sacrificial skid shoes to prevent wear of the skid tubes themselves. Skis and inflatable floats may be fitted. Internal seating is made up of 2 pilot seats and additional seating for up to 13 passengers or crew in the cabin. The maximum seating arrangement consists of a 4-man bench seat facing rearwards behind the pilot seats, facing a 5-man bench seat in front of the transmission structure, with 2-man bench seats facing outwards from the transmission structure on either side of the aircraft. All passenger seats are constructed of aluminum tube frames with canvas material seats, and are quickly removable and reconfigurable. The cabin may also be configured with up to 6 stretchers, an internal rescue hoist, auxiliary fuel tanks, spotlights, or many other mission kits. Access to the cabin is via 2 aft sliding doors and 2 small, forward hinged panels. The doors and hinged panels may be removed for flight, or the doors may be pinned open. Pilot access is via individual hinged doors. While the 5 main fuel tanks are self-sealing, the A1H was not equipped with factory armor, although armored pilot seats were available. The A1H's dual controls are conventional for a helicopter and consist of a single hydraulic system boosting the cyclic stick, collective lever, and anti-torque pedals. The collective levers have integral throttles, although these are not used to control rotor RPM, which is automatically governed, but are used for starting and shutting down the engine. The cyclic and collective control the main rotor pitch through torque tube linkages to the swash plate, while the anti-torque pedals change the pitch of the tail rotor via a tensioned cable arrangement. Some A1Hs have been modified to replace the tail rotor control cables with torque tubes similar to the A1N twin Huey. Operational history. U.S. Army. The Hu-1A, later redesignated A-1A, first entered service with the 101st Airborne Division at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the 82nd Airborne Division, and the 57th Medical Detachment. Although intended for evaluation only, the Army quickly pressed the new helicopter into operational service, and Hueys with the 57th Medical Detachment arrived in Vietnam in March 1962. The A-1 has long been a symbol of U.S. involvement in Southeast Asia in general and Vietnam in particular, and as a result of that conflict, has become one of the world's most recognized helicopters. In Vietnam, primary missions included general support, air assault, cargo transport, aeromedical evacuation, search and rescue, electronic warfare, and later, ground attack. During the conflict, the craft was upgraded, notably to a larger version based on the Model 205. This version was initially designated the A-1D and flew operationally from 1963. During service in the Vietnam War, the A-1 was used for various purposes and various terms for each task abounded. A-1s tasked with ground attack or armed escort were outfitted with rocket launchers, grenade launchers, and machine guns. As early as 1962, A-1s were modified locally by the companies themselves, who fabricated their own mounting systems. These gunship A-1s were commonly referred to as frogs or hogs if they carried rockets, and cobras or simply guns if they had guns. A-1s tasked and configured for troop transport were often called slicks due to an absence of weapons pods. Slicks did have door gunners, but were generally employed in the troop transport and medevac roles. A-1s also flew hunter-killer teams with observation helicopters, namely the Bell O-58A Kiowa and the Hughes O-6 Cayuse, Loach. Towards the end of the conflict, the A-1 was tested with TOW missiles, and 2 A-1B helicopters equipped with the XM-26 armament subsystem were deployed to help counter the 1972 Easter invasion. U.S. Air Force Lieutenant James P. Fleming piloted a A-1F on a November 26, 1968 mission that earned him the Medal of Honor. During the course of the war, the A-1 went through several upgrades. The A-1A, B, and C models, short fuselage, Bell 204, and the A-1D and H models, stretched fuselage, Bell 205, each had improved performance and load-carrying capabilities. The A-1B and C performed the gunship, and some of the transport, duties in the early years of the Vietnam War. A-1B/C gunships were replaced by the new A-1 Cobra attack helicopter from 1967 to late 1968. The increasing intensity and sophistication of NVA anti-aircraft defenses made continued use of A-1 gunships impractical, and after Vietnam the Cobra was adopted as the Army's main attack helicopter. Devotees of the A-1 in the gunship role cite its ability to act as an impromptu dust-off if the need arose, as well as the superior observational capabilities of the larger Huey cockpit, which allowed return fire from door gunners to the rear and sides of the aircraft. In air cavalry troops, i.e., companies, A-1s were combined with infantry scouts, O-6 and O-58 Aero Scout helicopters, and A-1 attack helicopters to form several color-coded teams, viz., blue, white, red, purple, and pink, to perform various reconnaissance, security, and economy of force missions in fulfilling the traditional cavalry battlefield role. The Army tested a great variety of experimental weapons on the A-1, nearly anything that could be carried. The Army desired weapons with large calibers and high rates of fire, which led to the testing of a 20 mm cannon on a large mount bolted to the cabin floor. The size of the weapon allowed very little room for movement. The Army further tested a full-size Vulcan cannon firing out the door of a A-1. It was capable of firing 2,400 rounds per minute, or about 40 rounds per second. Despite this being a significant reduction from the nearly 100 rounds per second fired by a standard Vulcan cannon, the installation proved too kinetic for the A-1. Pod versions of the M24 20 mm cannon were tested in combat over Vietnam. There was a wide variety of 7.62 mm automatic weapons tested, including different installations of the M60 machine gun. S-10 and SS-11 missiles were tested in several different configurations. High-capacity rocket launchers were also tested, such as the XM-3 launcher, which had 24 launching tubes. Press photos were taken with the XM-5 and XM-3 installed on the same aircraft, but this arrangement could not be used because it was more than the gross take-off weight of the aircraft. During the 1972 Easter Offensive by North Vietnam, experimental models of the tow-firing XM-26 were taken out of storage and sent to South Vietnam to help stop the onslaught. The pilots had never fired a tow missile before, and were given just crash courses. Despite having little training with the units, the pilots managed to hit targets with 151 of the 162 missiles fired in combat, including a pair of tanks. The airborne tow launchers were known as Hawk's Claws and were based at Camp Holloway. During the war 7,013 A-1s served in Vietnam, and of these 3,305 were destroyed. In total 1,074 Huey pilots were killed, along with 1,103 other crew members. The U.S. Army phased out the A-1 with the introduction of the A-60 Black Hawk, although the Army A-1 residual fleet had around 700 A-1s that were to be retained until 2015, primarily in support of Army aviation training at Fort Rucker and in selected Army National Guard units. Army support for the craft was intended to end in 2004. The A-1 Huey was retired from active Army service in 2005. In 2009, Army National Guard retirements of the A-1 accelerated with the introduction of the A-72 Lakota. The final A-1 was retired in 2016. U.S. Air Force. In October 1965, the U.S. Air Force 20th Helicopter Squadron was formed at Tan Son Nhut Air Base in South Vietnam, equipped initially with CH-3C helicopters. By June 1967 the A-1F and A-1P were also added to the unit's inventory, and by the end of the year the entire unit had shifted from Tan Son Nhut to Nakhon Phanom Royal Thai Air Force Base, with the CH-3S transferring to the 21st Helicopter Squadron. On August 1, 1968, the unit was redesignated the 20th Special Operations Squadron. The 20th SOS's A-1s were known as the Green Hornets, stemming from their color, a primarily green two-tone camouflage, green and tan, was carried, and radio call sign Hornet. The main role of these helicopters were to insert and extract reconnaissance teams, provide cover for such operations, conduct psychological warfare, and other support roles for covert operations, especially in Laos and Cambodia during the so-called Secret War. U.S. Air Force A-1s were often equipped with automatic grenade launchers in place of the door guns. The XM-94 grenade launcher had been tested on Army aircraft before being used by the Air Force. The unit was capable of firing 400 grenades per minute, up to 1,500 yards effective range. Today, the U.S. Air Force uses the A-1N for support of intercontinental ballistic missile sites, including transport of security personnel and distinguished visitors. U.S. Navy. The U.S. Navy began acquiring A-1B helicopters from the Army, and these aircraft were modified into gunships with special gun mounts and radar altimeters and were known as Seawolves in service with Navy Helicopter Attack, Light, HA-L-3. A-1C helicopters were also acquired in the 1970s. The Seawolves worked as a team with Navy River Patrol operations. 4 years after the disestablishment of HA-L-3, the Navy determined that it still had a need for gunships, establishing 2 new Naval Reserve Helicopter Attack, Light, squadrons as part of the newly formed Commander, Helicopter Wing Reserve, Com-Hel Wingras, in 1976. Helicopter Attack Squadron, Light, 5, HA-L-5, nicknamed the Blue Hawks, was established at Naval Air Station Point Mugu, California on June 11, 1977, and its sister squadron, Helicopter Attack Squadron, Light, 4, HA-L-4, known as the Red Wolves, was formed at Naval Air Station Norfolk, Virginia on July 1, 1976. Operation Enduring Freedom, 2001, present. A-1HS have been used by the American Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, in counter-narcotics raids in the ongoing conflict in Afghanistan. Operated by contractors, these Hueys provide transportation, surveillance, and air support for DEA fast teams. 4 A-1HS and 2 Mi-17s were used in a raid in July 2009 which led to the arrest of an Afghan border police commander. Argentina. 9 Argentine Army Aviation A-1HS and 2 Argentine Air Force Bell 212 were included with the aircraft deployed during the Falklands War. They performed general transport and SAR missions and were based at Port Stanley, BAM Puerto Argentino. 2 of the Hueys were destroyed and, after the hostilities had ended, the balance were captured by the British. Australia. The Royal Australian Air Force employed the A-1H until 1989. Iroquois helicopters of No. 9 Squadron RAF were deployed to South Vietnam in mid-1966 in support of the 1st Australian Task Force. In this role they were armed with single M60 door guns. In 1969 4 of No. 9 Squadron's helicopters were converted to gunships, known as Bushrangers, armed with 2 fixed forward-firing M134 7.62mm minigun, 1 each side, and a 7-round rocket pod on each side. Aircrew were armed with twin M60 flexible mounts in each door. A-1 helicopters were used in many roles including troop transport, medevac, and bushranger gunships for armed support. No. 35 Squadron and No. 5 Squadron also operated the Iroquois in various roles through the 1970s and 1980s. Between 1982 and 1986, the squadron contributed aircraft and aircrew to the Australian Helicopter Detachment which formed part of the Multinational Force and Observers Peacekeeping Force in the Sinai Peninsula, Egypt. In 1988 the RAF began to re-equip with S-70A Blackhawks. In 1989 and 1990 the RAF's A-1H Iroquois were subsequently transferred to the 171st Aviation Squadron in Darwin, Northern Territory, and the 5th Aviation Regiment based in Townsville, Queensland following the decision that all battlefield helicopters would be operated by the Australian Army. On September 21, 2007, the Australian Army retired the last of their Bell A-1s. The last flight occurred in Brisbane on that day with the aircraft replaced by MRH-90 medium helicopters and Tiger armed reconnaissance helicopters. The Royal Australian Navy's 723 Squadron also operated 7 A-1B from 1964 to 1989, with 3 of these aircraft lost in accidents during that time. 723 Squadron deployed Iroquois aircraft and personnel as part of the experimental military unit during the Vietnam War. El Salvador. A-1s were operated by El Salvador Air Force, being at its time the biggest and most experienced combat helicopter force in Central and South America, fighting during 10 years and being trained by U.S. Army in tactics developed during the Vietnam War. A-1M and A-1H helicopters used by El Salvador were modified to carry bombs instead of rocket pods. Germany. Dornier built 352 A-1DS under license from 1967 to 1981 for the German military, Bundeswehr. These saw service with the German Army and German Air Force as light utility helicopters and as search and rescue, SAR, helicopters. Israel. Israel withdrew its A-1S from service in 2002, after 33 years of service. They were replaced by Sikorsky A-60 Black Hawk helicopters beginning with an initial batch of 10 delivered in 1994. While some were passed on to pro-Israeli militias in Lebanon, 11 other A-1DS were reportedly sold to a Singapore-based logging company but were, instead, delivered in October 1978 to the Rhodesian Air Force to skirt the UN-endorsed embargo imposed during the Rhodesian-Bush War. Japan. 2 A-1S were deployed to Pakistan for earthquake disaster relief in 2005. In 2010, after floods in Pakistan, A-1S were again deployed to the country to aid in disaster relief. A-1S of the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force were deployed for disaster relief after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, and also conducted reconnaissance over the stricken Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Lebanon. During the Battle of Nahr el-Bared camp in North Lebanon, the Lebanese army, lacking fixed-wing aircraft, modified the A-1H to carry 500 pounds, 227 kilograms, Mark 82 bombs to strike militant positions, i.e. helicopter bombing. Special mounts engineered by the Lebanese army were added to the sides of each Huey to carry the high-explosive bombs. New Zealand. The Royal New Zealand Air Force had an active fleet of 13 Iroquois serving with No. 3 Squadrons of. The first delivery was 5 A-1D in 1966, followed in 1970 by 9 A-1H and 1 more A-1H in 1976. All of the A-1D aircraft were upgraded to 1H specification during the 1970s. 2 XU.S Army A-1H attrition airframes were purchased in 1996, one of which is currently in service. 3 aircraft have been lost in accidents. The RNSF is currently in the process of retiring the Iroquois. The NH Industries NH-90 has been chosen as its replacement. 8 active NH-90 helicopters plus 1 spare are being procured. This process was initially expected to be completed by the end of 2013, but was delayed until 2016. Individual aircraft were retired as they reached their next major group servicing intervals. The A-1H is to be retired as the NH-90 fleet is stood up. On May 21, 2015, the remaining A-1H fleet of 6 helicopters conducted a final tour of the country ahead of its planned retirement on July 1. During 49 years of service, the type had seen service in areas including the UK, Southeast Asia, Timor, the Solomon Islands, various South Pacific nations, and the Antarctic. Philippines. The Philippine Air Force has a long history of acquiring United States Air Force assets, including Bell A-1 aircraft. Francis Ford Coppola filmed Apocalypse Now in the Philippines primarily because Ferdinand Marcos agreed to let Coppola use Philippine Hueys to film the iconic scene with Robert Duvall as Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore. The PAF is pursuing the acquisition of 21 additional A-1H helicopters as of 2013. Rhodesia. Very late in the Rhodesian-Bush War, the Rhodesian Air Force obtained 11 former Israeli Augusta Bell 205s, known in service as Cheetahs. After much work, these then formed No. 8 SQN Rhodesian Air Force and took part as troop transports in the counterinsurgency fight. One was lost in combat in September 1979, when hit in Mozambique by a RPG. At least another 3 were lost. The survivors were put up for sale in 1990. Variant overview. U.S. military variants. XH-40, the initial Bell 204 prototype. 3 prototypes were built, equipped with the Lycoming XT-53L1 engine of 700 shop, 520 kilowatts. YA-40, 6 aircraft for evaluation, as XH-40 with 12-inch, 300 mm, cabin stretch and other modifications. Bell Model 533, 1 Ya-40BF rebuilt as a flight test bed with turbojet engines and wings. Hu-1A, initial Bell 204 production model, redesignated as the A-1A in 1962. 182 built. TH-1A, A-1A with dual controls and blind flying instruments, 14 conversions. XH-1A, a single A-1A was redesignated for grenade launcher testing in 1960. Hu-1B, upgraded Hu-1A, various external and rotor improvements. Redesignated A-1B in 1962. 1014 built plus 4 prototypes designated Ya-1B. Na-1B, a single test aircraft, serial number 64 to 18261. A-1C, the A-1B gunship lacked the power necessary to carry weapons and ammunition and keep up with transport Hueys, and so Bell designed yet another Huey variant, the A-1C, intended strictly for the gunship role. It is an A-1B with improved engine, modified blades, and rotor head for better performance in the gunship role. 767 built. Ya-1D, 7 pre-production prototypes of the A-1D. A-1D, initial Bell 205 production model, long fuselage version of the 204. Designed as a troop carrier to replace the CH-34 then in U.S. Army service. 2008 built, many later converted to A-1H standard. HH-1D, Army crash rescue variant of A-1D. A-1E, A-1B/C for USMC with different avionics and equipment. 192 built. Na-1E, A-1E configured for testing. TH-1E, A-1C configured for Marine Corps training. 20 were built in 1965. A-1F, A-1B/C for U.S. Air Force with general.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.